Morning, men. Sir, ooh. I appreciate you all coming back. I know it's for the breakfast. And I brought some props today. All right. Well, I hope that everyone enjoyed the conversations as I kind of bounced around and heard some of the different feedback that I heard over the past week and some of the discussions that were occurring in the small groups. I recognize that this message hits everybody in a different place because we're all in a different place. And so what I would ask is continue to provide the feedback to me. Several of you have reached out through different means. And I sincerely appreciate this. This is something God laid on my heart to share this series with you. And this is the first time I've had the chance to kind of present it to a live audience. So again, I appreciate the opportunity. So again, this series is not about me. It's about following Jesus and his leadership. Last week we talked about competition. We talked about our natural predisposition to compete with everyone and everything, right? That's, in my opinion, right, this is one of the themes I got from the Army War College, right, that we're in a state of constant competition from a nation perspective, but I think we're in a constant competition at a person by person and a human perspective, and I think that's part of our sinful nature, right, is that we are our predisposition is not to love. Our predisposition is to compete, right? So it takes intentionality to how do I serve? How do I put the other person's needs above my own? That's not our natural reaction, right? Our natural response in any situation is to compete, to seek a competitive advantage, and look at the environment is what can I do for me? Right? So, and again, last week we talked about how does service, right, where you put the needs of somebody else, how does that change your perspective? Today, we're going to talk about leadership. I'm going to give some examples from my personal experience of where I saw leadership in action. Next week, we're going to talk about leader, like what is a leader, leader identity. The fourth week, we're going to talk about how do we develop leaders, and then I'm going to wrap it up with how do we lead ourselves and lead others to Jesus. So again, this idea that leadership is a timeless principle that I would argue goes back to the way that God has wired us. Right? We crave leadership. Right? We look for. We talk about the sense of belonging, the sense of togetherness, those kind of things, but we look to leaders who are able to pull that together, right? We are naturally wired by God to be followers, right? So we always are looking for leaders, right? And, some people use the John Maxwell definition of leadership that leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Right? So where we're being influenced, how we're being influenced, right? In a certain sense, it's how we're being led. So again, we're always craving leadership. And I'm going to talk about kind of, two examples, again, in my personal experiences and deployments where, there were major events, right? The first presidential election in Afghanistan in 2004, and then the Kosovo Declaration of Independence in 2008, right? These were leader-driven events, right? There's a huge a huge desire by those populations to be part of an event because they were inspired by leaders, all right? So the first one that I want to talk about, and I actually brought it's a little dusty here, so it's a sign of how clean my office is at home. This is a ballot from the election in Afghanistan in 2004. So you're going to have to go back a few years. But if you remember, Afghanistan was a tribal area, and the borders of Afghanistan weren't drawn by the nation of Afghanistan. The borders of Afghanistan were drawn by other nations to keep, the Silk Road intact, to keep other nations apart, right? So the people of Afghanistan didn't view their own country as their own, right? They were very tribal. They lived in very small areas, right? And so they didn't see themselves as part of a nation, right? In 2004, through leadership, right, they decided to have a national election. That national election to elect their first ever president. And people went around and, just like they do today, just like we're in campaign season right now, right? We're in election season now. They went around and presented their vision of what they wanted Afghanistan to look like. Okay? Now, admittedly, right, Afghanistan in 2004 does not look like America in 2022, right? But that basic desire by people to look for and be part of and follow a leader, right? So, in that election, so you can see, I know you probably can't see this very well here, but you can come up and see this, there's a whole bunch of people on this ballot, right? And it's got their name in a couple different languages, it's got their picture, and then it's got a symbol. And you may wonder, like, well, what's the big deal about a symbol? So you have to understand that in Afghanistan, right, there's no power. I mean, this is. I would tell my parents, right, I have a digital picture of the Old Testament, right? This is the most undeveloped area almost in the world. And so they didn't have television, they didn't have radio, and most of them were illiterate. And so it didn't matter how many languages you put on that ballot, right? They weren't able to read it. But they had 80% participation in that first election. I watched people walk 10 miles, and if you know what Afghanistan looks like, it's not a flat desert, it's the foothills of the Himalayas, right? So it's a very mountainous area, right? I watched them walk 10 miles to vote, to be part of something because of these leaders. And oh, by the way they voted, right? So the people would, as they were campaigning, they would identify themselves by their symbol, right? Because they could look at, so if you can't read and you've never seen their face, because they don't have a television, right? But you can vote by their symbol. And the way they vote, as you probably have seen in Iraq and other places, right? They dip their finger in that permanent purple stain, right? And then they make their mark, right here on this. And then it stains their finger so you can't vote again. But guess what else that stained finger does? It identifies you as participating in that election, right? It identifies you for weeks afterwards as being part of following a leader. And so if you're the Taliban or some other entity, right, that doesn't want a leader leading their people into a free and democracy, guess what you do? You target the people who voted. You target the followers of those leaders, right? The leaders are always going to be targeted, right? But you target the followers of those leaders. But guess what? People still, because they crave leadership, they still voted. They still follow people, right? Now this example, right? This is a macro level thing, right? And so some of you may be, equating that to political leaders of today or business leaders or somebody else, right? But this desire for leadership is at the most basic level, right? The other event that I was very fortunate to be part of, so if you remember this place called Kosovo, so this kind of fell out of the news and the awareness of the American public when the Iraq and Afghanistan wars kicked off post 9/11, right? But in 1999, in this area, right, there was a very intense conflict. And Kosovo was a province of Serbia, right? In Kosovo, which was a predominantly Muslim area that was more closely aligned with Albania, And Serbia was actually Orthodox Christian. So in this specific scenario, right, the U.S. was supporting the Muslim province in a Serbian nation. Now, I say that because the leadership in Serbia, in my opinion, was not following their faith. Okay, and there were some incredible atrocities that happened there. But in 2008, they went from a separatist province, and I had the great honor of listening to their prime minister read their Declaration of Independence live. Right, and so in a moment, I went from a province to a new country. Right, and so in 2008, Kosovo, under the leadership of that prime minister, right, and you can see the expressions here on those people's faces. It was a 3-day celebration because they were following that prime minister. They were following that leader. Right? So, that first picture, you see the Albanian flag, the red flag, but you also see the American flag, right? Because they looked at us as leaders, right? We walked around, so we had it wasn't a large contingency of people there, right? This was not a hostile environment the way that the Middle East was at this time. But they looked at us as a nation and as people for our leadership. Right, they wanted to emulate, and they looked, our form of government, our, everything from our music, all those things, right, were influences on them because they wanted to follow our leadership. So again, two examples at the macro scale, right, where people are following leaders, right? Those are movements, those are huge major world events, right? But they happen because of leaders. They happen because of leadership, right? And that's what, in that leadership of bringing that very large coalition of people together is something that Jesus did do and continues to do for us, right? We are wired to follow. We are wired to crave leadership, okay? So what is leadership, right? I touched on this a little bit in my intro last time, right? But the Army defines it as purpose, direction, and motivation, okay? So purpose, very simply stated, is the why, okay? Why are we doing this, right? The direction is how. And the motivation, which I'll spend some time on again here today, is really about it's about energy. So how do you provide the energy to accomplish what you're trying to do? Okay? So I recognize, how many people here have heard of the Far Side? Okay, good. I wasn't sure where if this is going to land. So I recognize most of you are like, oh, great, soldier boy, you're going to tell me what my purpose in life is, right? You're going to solve all my problems, and I'll tell you that it's not about your purpose. It's not about my purpose, right? Whose purpose is it? God's, right? It's actually really simple. We don't have to figure out our purpose, right? This is a very popular topic in our culture right now, right? What's your purpose? What's your why? I have no idea. I know what God's is. And I do my very best to point myself and to point others to Him, right? Lead others to God, right? It's not about, again, with this Far Side commercial, cartoon, right? It's not about finding that thing, that whatever he's pulling out of the couch there, right? That's not about finding your purpose. Your purpose is about following God, right? And understanding His purpose, right? Following Him leads us, So, when you think about, okay, what is this purpose, right? So a leader provides this to their followers, right? It gives them the reason to achieve the mission, right? It's the why. So, they convey this, through a variety of different means, right? You can lead by example, you can lead by inspiration. Jesus did all those things, right? He was the Son of God on earth, and his words, his actions, the stories that he told, the parables he had, he was providing us with purpose. He explained to us, what needed to be done. He explained to us why it needed to be done. And he was able to articulate it in ways through parables and stories and examples that transcend time, right? That's one of the things that is, as I studied a lot of history last year at the Army War College, you start to realize there's literally nothing new under the sun, right? Almost everything you can draw a historical example to. In fact, there's certain senior leaders in the military that will come to you and say, you say, hey, sir, ma'am, here's this problem. They'll be like, okay, well, tell me about a historical example where, somebody has faced this situation before. Well, no, this is totally new, never happened before. And they're going to throw you out of the office because there is nothing new, right? And again, it goes back to what I talked a little bit about the difference between the nature and culture of warfare, right? How we fight always changes. Why we fight, right? We talked about the fear, honor, and interest. Why we fight stays the same. Okay? So direction. So again, I'll throw the far side up here. Okay? Direction is, where are we going? Right? Where does Jesus direct us to go? Okay? Sometimes I feel like that's my wife and I, and she's asking me those same questions. She's like, are you sure this is where we should be going? Because I see everybody else going left, and you're telling me to go right. And you know what? She's probably correct. Okay? So again, direction is telling people what to do, right? How do we accomplish the mission, right? So again, the Army has this very elaborate, land domination through joint fires, blah, 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 right? It's a lot of fancy words that says our direction is to dominate the land domain, okay? But that's not what Jesus calls us to do, right? What does Jesus call us to do, right? How do we serve others? How do we identify needs of those who live around us and love them, support them, care for them, right? How do we communicate the love that Jesus has, for them? All right, motivation. It's my favorite one, right? So I know some of you came up to me and said, you've had some military service before, and I sincerely appreciate your military service. And this picture probably generates an emotion for you if you've had military service, or maybe you had a father or father figure in your life who decided that, motivation is me providing the appropriate amount of volume or, lashings or, whatever it is, right, to get compliance out of a given situation, right? And you know what? We still use this technique today, right, of providing, and I wouldn't call it intimidation, but motivating people by, making them think. And you know what is incredibly effective about this? You know what that soldier that's being yelled at is not thinking about right now? Themselves, right? They're thinking about, well, one, they're thinking this guy's gonna, chew me up and spit me out, right? But they're not thinking about themselves. They're thinking about how do I how do I do what I'm being instructed to do? And by the way, we do everything in the military as a team, right? There is no, army of one, approach, right? So while he's getting, some corrective instruction in this situation, right? I guarantee he's being asked to do something as a team. And so he's not thinking about himself, right? He's thinking about, as quickly as possible, he's going to accomplish what he's being directed to do, most likely as a team, right? But for most of us, right, we don't run around yelling at people, right? That's not how we motivate ourselves, and that's not how we motivate other people. And that's certainly not how Jesus motivated people, right? Jesus, I don't think anywhere in the Bible that I can recall that, Jesus jumped up and down and screamed, gosh darn it, why wouldn't you just do this, right? He inspired us, right? He provided a relationship of trust, which trust is, we all understand, is earned. So, and he did that in a positive environment, right? So I want you to think about motivation as energy. How do you manage your energy? How much energy you have, that's the function of many different things, right? But we all have a certain amount of energy to get through our day every day, just like we always have a certain amount of motivation. When somebody says, I've lost my motivation, you haven't lost your motivation. You always have motivation, right? If there is something that excites you, that interests you, you're going to find the energy to accomplish it. Okay? So, there's a great article in the Harvard Business Record that came out a few years ago that says, don't manage your time, manage your energy. Right? Think about, your energy, what gives you that energy is where your motivations are, right? But but examine that, look at that, understand, okay, if I get really excited about how a sports team is doing, right? My motivation during a football game or a basketball game is the highest it is all week. That's awesome. But where else should that highest energy be, right? Where else should you be getting that energy from, right? And so think about where you get your energy from, because that's where your motivations are right now, right? And so maybe that requires some self-reflection to say, I've misplaced my priorities. I've maybe misaligned what's most important to me, because I'm getting energy from these things, but then when my family needs me or I have a friend in need, sorry, I had a long day at work, or I had a long this, I'm really tired, right? You're not managing your energy. So think about, from a motivation perspective, how am I managing my energy, right? And my hope for you is that following Jesus, doing things is up there on the slide, right? Doing things in the name of Jesus, for Jesus, gives you energy. That invigorates you, that excites you, coming to church, coming to worship, coming to Wednesday morning, right? That's not just a routine, right? That actually is a source of energy for you. I told you last week, right, I'm part of 2 men's groups because I need a lot of help, right? But I look forward to those groups with great energy because they provide me with wisdom, with counsel, with purpose, direction, and motivation, right? Those small groups lead me, and I hope some days that I reciprocate that leadership back to them, okay? All right. So a lot of people think that the military, so how does the military execute leadership, right? Well, they probably do it, it's left, right, put your left hand here, form a fist, take your right hand, point it straight this way, very prescriptive, right? That's how, it's absolutely like step by step, right? That used to be how the military worked. And guess what we figured out? It doesn't work, right? So we use a concept now called mission command, right? And so you're like, okay, so what does mission command mean? What does, what's different about this pivot from a military perspective about how you provide leadership, how you provide purpose, direction, and motivation, versus, left, right, okay? So first of all, you start with you start with authority. And God gives us authority, right? We are all children of God, and we're all disciples of God, right? And so we're called by God's authority, right, to go out and lead others. Not for them to follow us, but to point them to follow Jesus, right? That's, so first of all, it starts with authorities, okay? So it's not left, right, right? It's saying, I'm empowering you. God is empowering us, right, to lead others back to him. And you do that through disciplined initiative, right? Jesus in the Bible tells parables and stories, but he doesn't tell us exactly what to do, right? Just like, again, we don't tell you exactly what to do in the military anymore, right? We give you an end state. Here's the mission that we're trying to accomplish. Here's the authorities that you have. And then you, through discipline initiative, figure out the way, right? And as long as you're operating within those authorities, within God's love, doing things in God's love, the path that we choose, right, is, you realize quite quickly, is really insignificant. As long as your end state is serving Jesus and serving others, and you're operating under his authority and following and doing it in love, right, you're achieving the mission, right? And so there isn't, you've heard this around here a lot, right? There isn't a, only, the Lutheran Church of Hope way to do Christianity, right? We talked about, traditions and some of those other things in some of the recent sermons, right? Traditions are just methods. They're means, they're ways, right? But operating within, those parameters, as long as you're accomplishing those key tasks, which, by the way, Jesus' key tasks, preaching, teaching, and healing, right? As long as now, we don't get it, we don't have the same power as Jesus, right, to do all those things, right? But our key tasks really are pretty simple. Love, serve, and point them, lead them back to Jesus, right? And again, it ultimately means we're, if you think about the mission statement here at Hope, right, where we're trying to lead men, filled with hope, lead them, to meet, our Savior Jesus and make heaven more crowded. It's a very simple end state, and how we get there, right, as long as, again, we're operating under God's authority, is really a secondary piece to this. Oh, I realize I am running over here. Okay, So a couple questions here for you to kind of take away from today's discussions, right? So how do I align my purpose with Jesus' purpose? What direction is Jesus calling me in? And then where do I find energy and motivation? And I know some of you have come up to me and you've asked for these slides and these things. I'll make sure that these slides both throughout this whole series are available. We'll figure out the fancy link tree thing because I know several of you have asked for this. But again, think about for your small groups here as we think about the topic of leadership, of purpose, direction, and motivation. You can talk about it at a macro scale. You can talk about it at your own personal family perspective. But I ask you to think about these questions here today. I look forward to next week we're going to talk about leader. What is a leader in the Army's concept of be, know, and do. We're going to talk about leader identity, right? And how we define ourselves as followers of Jesus and as a Christian. And so I look forward to next week's conversation, and I appreciate your attention today. Thank you.